Hi, I'm Steve Gill. This is the Tennessee Star Gill Report political series, and today we're talking with State Senator Mark Green, West Point grad, military officer, father, family man, trout fisherman, doctor. I mean, you just add the whole thing. It's like a 5-page resume. Mark, good to have you with us today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Steve. Thanks for
How did you get into this crazy business of politics? I mean, you've got a great resume, but beyond that, we want to find out a little bit about who you are. How did you get into this?
Well, it's an interesting story. You know, I had started my company and we had our foundation going, which was, you know, doing some overseas medical missions trips. We had started some free clinics, one in Clarksville and one in Memphis, and I thought that would be my life's work. The Lieutenant Governor, Ron Ramsey, calls me and says, "Do you want to run for the state Senate?" And I really was prepared to tell him no. I mean, I thought I was going to say no, but I went back to West Point for my 25th reunion. And my classmate is giving us this briefing on how West Point has changed over the years. And he puts this slide up at the very end that says, this is the mission of West Point. And it hasn't changed. The mission of West Point remains to train leaders for a lifetime of service for the nation. And it was sort of like Virginia Woolf would call a moment of being. I realized, oh my gosh, I took taxpayer dollars to go to a college whose purpose was to train a leader for the service, for a lifetime. So I basically called Ron Ramsey and said, okay, I'm in. And the rest is history, I guess.
Tell us a little about going to West Point. I mean, it is, when I was a White House fellow, we were touring West Point one day, and they were kind of giving us the schedule at 5:01 you do this, at 5:31 you do this, and it was this kind of rigorous schedule throughout the day. And one of the people in our group said, well, when do you just hang out at the fraternity house and watch the Andy Griffith show? It's like completely different college environment.
Yeah, there's none of that, right? I mean, it's you've got 20 hours of 20 credit hours a semester. You've got military training. You've got required sports. You have to either be intercollegiate or intramural sports. So it's a pretty demanding 4 years. I like to say, I hated being there, but I love being from there. It was a great place to go to school, a great place to learn, and especially leadership, because from day one you're learning how to lead people. You're learning how to be prepared to present to Congress. It's an amazing place.
A lot of the folks that go into the military, particularly that go to West Point or the other service academies, come from a military background. Was your father, were your parents in the military?
No. Well, my dad was in the Air Force, but not while I was growing up. He had gotten out of the Air Force. He medically retired from got out of the Air Force because of a medical issue. And, many years later I came along. So I was raised in sort of a culture of, an austere father. But not, not associated with the military in any way.
When you look at what West Point did to your career, obviously you went into the Army after you got out of West Point. How did you end up in medical school?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Again, it kind of comes back to my dad. I was commanding an infantry company in the 82nd Airborne Division, excited about being an infantry officer, had my Ranger tab and all those badges that infantry officers go after. And Dad had a catastrophic event happen. A surgeon saved his life, and it had such a profound impact on me. I went to the Army and said, I want to do what that guy does. I want to save people's lives. And the Army said, sure. They actually had a program that allowed officers to transition and do that. Went to medical school in Dayton, Ohio, and an ER residency at Fort Hood, Texas. And of course 9/11 happens, and I'm off to war. But it was my dad again.
You had one very fascinating evening while you were in the military.
Yeah.
After they captured Saddam Hussein, it was like, hey, watch this guy tonight, make sure he doesn't kill himself.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I was a part of the actual mission that nabbed him, so I was covering the target. We got back from the mission, we knew we had captured Saddam, and I thought, gosh, I've at least got to get a peek at this guy. So I go over to the interrogation facility where I no longer have responsibilities. Another physician had come in to augment me, and he was covering the interrogation facility, and I was just covering the targets, the actual hit. And so I go over and I'm standing outside the cell and I'm looking at Saddam Hussein, inside the cell, and the commander comes out and says, I want a physician to stay with this guy all night tonight. Mark, will you do it? And I said, absolutely. And so I go in, and I really thought I'd just be sitting there watching him sleep, but Saddam wanted to talk, so he, sat up and we just carried on a conversation for about 6 hours.
He spoke English?
He spoke Arabic through an interpreter, but I had a great relationship with the interpreter, and so he interpreted, and I asked tons of different questions, and Saddam answered.
Did he open up during the course of the night? I mean, how did that conversation take place?
It started when he asked me to take his blood pressure. And you know, when you're taking someone's blood pressure, you're sort of in their face and they're in your face, and he's checking me out. And Saddam just very nonchalantly says, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a physician, but politics had too great a hold on my heart. And the image of the butcher of Baghdad taking the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm is what started this conversation that was pretty amazing.
You've made the transition into politics. You took a brief side swipe at looking to becoming Secretary of the Army. You were nominated by President Trump to become the Secretary of the Army. Talk us through a little bit about what happened there, and do you have regrets for even going for that and dropping out of the governor's race?
No, I mean, I learned a great deal from all of that, and I think in retrospect, looking at the governor's race, you know, this was how it was supposed to end up. But for me, I learned a great deal through that process about, you know, politics in Washington, D.C. It made me very much aware that the real fire is in Washington. Tennessee's going to be great. You know, we're at an A- right now. There's a few things that need to be fixed, but for the most part, Tennessee's running very well. Washington's failing. And that's where the fire is, and I'm a guy that's always kind of run to the fire, whether it was to be an ER physician or to be an Army Ranger. You know, I've always been the guy that goes to the tip of the spear, so to speak, and to put it in Army terms, that's where I want to be. And that experience with the Secretary of the Army thing opened my eyes to what's going on in Washington.
We have fewer members of Congress and the U.S. Senate who have a military background. I mean, after World War II, everybody did. Does that give you a lead in being able to represent still in the service of the military and being able to be a guy that's been boots on the ground, been there, done that, and know what our men and women in military need? Absolutely.
I mean, you take, for example, the ambush that happened in Nigeria. When Congress has the responsibility to oversight the Pentagon, you know, do you want somebody asking the questions that can say, well, where was your your air support? Where was your medical unit that was going to come in and rescue if anything went bad? You know, I know the questions to ask in situations like this. Someone who's never served, they don't know the questions to ask.
Healthcare is a big issue policy-wise right now as well. Your background, not only as a physician, but also as a business owner in the healthcare industry. Are there issues in the healthcare industry that you have top of your list of, if you get to Washington, this is what I want to focus on?
Sure, there are a couple of those, but just to add to what you just sort of teed up is my experience. You know, I'm a cancer patient, so I understand the doctor-patient relationship on both sides of the stethoscope. But in terms of fixing things in Washington, D.C., the labor index, in Tennessee, a heart attack gets paid 1/3 what a heart attack gets paid in California. That makes no sense. So if you want to help our rural hospitals, you got to make sure that they get paid fairly from Washington.
Is that a function of Obamacare? We hear a lot from the left, from Democrats right now, that if we don't reimpose and expand Obamacare, then rural hospitals are going to close. It sounds like that's the reason they're closing, not because we're not funding a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington.
There's a lot of reasons why rural hospitals are closing. There are also just about as many rural hospitals that are doing very well. So this is about finding the revenue streams that work for those facilities and making sure they get paid fairly. The labor index has been around since really many, many years, and it's not related to Obamacare. If we fix that, that's just one fix. You know, another is certificates of need, where it basically is a restraint on trade. But a small hospital could very easily run a few nursing home beds and make another $1.5 million in revenue. And most of the ones that have closed in Tennessee is because they were losing about $1 million a year. So just a simple fix. You know, that's too much government. Certificate of need, that's where the government comes in and says, hey, we're going to tell you how to do your business. So we just get government out of the way and these hospitals will flourish.
Education is another issue that we hear a lot about in terms of concerns of voters. If you're in Congress, what would be your education priority? How do you deal with education issues? I know most of that is local, but the federal government imposes about 85% of the regulation and about 10% of the money. How do we balance that a little better?
So first off, ESSA has got to go, right? I think it's all it is this overbearing federal program that the states have to comply with. If we can't get rid of it, then we ought to allow states to opt out of it. That's probably one of the biggest concerns. But two, you can look at sort of college education and the way student loans have resulted in massive increases, just like in the healthcare business, the third-party payer insurance has caused the cost of health costs to go twice the rate of inflation. The student loan issue has allowed schools to charge more and more money without really delivering that much more on the other end. I would love to see, and one of the bills that I think I'd like to propose when I first get there, is a program where student loans can be paid back just like an employer does with 401ks. With pre-tax dollars, the employer matches what the employee is putting in, and it allows that young person right out of college to more quickly pay off their student loans with pre-tax dollars. And the young college graduate is not really thinking about his 401k, but he's certainly thinking about that big debt that he had from college, or she had from college. And so being able to pay that back quickly, I think, is a solution to a couple of different problems. Because one, the government backs those loans. So when they fail, it's a cost of the government. So the government wins. Of course, the employer wins because now he's got an initiative to recruit people to his business, and clearly the employee wins because the student loans get paid back faster.
Yeah, I think a lot of people lose out in this kind of recruitment idea of businesses that getting and keeping a good employee saves them from having to retrain, recruit another employee. So this program would actually save them money by not only getting them great people that are going to go to that business rather than somewhere else because of that opportunity, but also they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to kind of move up in the company rather than having to have that constant turnover that cost employers money.
Absolutely, and millennials are coming out of college now saddled with just terrible debt, and the opportunity to help them, to free them up so that they can start looking at growing wealth, I think it's a win-win-win.
President Trump has been a key player in almost every race in Tennessee. I think from dog catcher up to U.S. Senate races, everybody's saying, I'm with President Trump, whether they are personally or policy-wise.
Sure.
How do you see the job that President Trump is doing? And if you had to tweak some of the policy issues he's working on, what would you fix? What would you change?
I think, the tax cuts have been fantastic. They've stimulated the economy. We've got unemployment for particularly African Americans and Latino Americans that's the lowest it's ever been. And now women, I think unemployment for women is lower than it's been in 63 years. So, clearly there are tons of these policies that are just making a huge impact.
Why is that not translating more into higher approval rating for President Trump? He's at a 50% approval rating now into the latest, I think, Gallup. Others are showing him 4 or 5 points higher than Barack Obama at this same time. And yet we have one of the best economies we've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
You're seeing a change in foreign policy. On almost every policy front, it seems like the public supports it, but they don't support him as high as you would expect.
Well, I think a lot of that, one, is the nature of these polls and approval ratings and things like that. He was supposed to lose the election, right? And he won pretty resoundingly. So I think looking at those numbers, you got to take that into consideration. And then, the president's his mouthpiece is himself. There's no network out there, not a single one, that's saying the good things about this president. He talked about cutting regulations, and his goal was, I think it was 3 for every one, and he's really doing 9 for every one. They're getting rid of 9 regulations for every one they're putting into place, and that is unsaddling the economy. It's unsaddling the job creators to help those people who are unemployed find work.
He pointed out during the campaign that the tax cuts that he was proposing were going to be important, but as he talked to businesses, the deregulation, getting government off their back, out of their way, was going to have a more profound impact on creating jobs and expanding the economy. And again, the tax cuts really haven't even gone into effect yet. So it's that regulatory cutting that really is spurring things, and the anticipation of the tax cuts.
That's right. Some people have said the regulatory burden on the entire economy is $2 trillion. So imagine what happens to the economy if we free that money up.
Build the wall has been a theme. We still don't have the wall. We have Republican control of Congress. We have Republican control of the Senate. Why aren't we able to get these things done with Republicans in charge of the White House, the Senate, and the House?
We've got to get that done. We have a problem with, just recently, some terrorists from Yemen attempted to come over the border. They did get through the border and were later caught. I forget which state it was. Very clearly there is a huge risk for the United States there. On top of that, you've got MS-13, you've got drug trafficking, you've got human trafficking. It's a travesty what's going on down there. And if you put a wall up, you create a disincentive for moving across Latin America to come to the United States. At the same time, providing for legal immigration and creating systems that allow people who are truly asylum seekers or legitimate asylum seekers, we've got to do that too. So your question was, though, why? And I think it's just all about the media and communicating the message.
As you're out there campaigning, Tennessee may be a little bit different. We're not really seeing a blue wave here. There is talk of a blue wave nationally. 61 House seats in the country will determine whether Nancy Pelosi or a Republican is the next speaker. First of all, there's no way you'll vote for Nancy Pelosi.
No intention there.
On the Republican side, who should lead? And again, you're going to have 25, 30, maybe 35 new Republican members of the House. That throws the speakership into an election as well. Who do you see emerging from that?
Well, I really like Jim Jordan. He has just been so good to me, and he's been a friend for years. As it sits right now, I think I'm supporting Jim.
He's Freedom Caucus. Will you be part of the Freedom Caucus?
Yeah, they've offered to have me join the Freedom Caucus, and I've told them yes.
And they've been a key. It's kind of like we've seen in Tennessee in the state Senate and the state House. A few conservatives who mean it, who will vote in a principled way, can have a big impact on legislation. You may not have 435 conservatives in Congress. You may not even have 237. But if you've got 35, 40, 45, you can really move the policy dial.
Yeah, and I think the number's closer to 60. But it's they have had an impact for good in the Congress. And I think you see now sort of the more what some people would say establishment Republicans working better with the Freedom Caucus folks. They seem to be working together and they're more aligned, and I think that's very good. And if Jim became the speaker or at least senior leadership, that would be even better at putting the two together. I kind of look at the conservatives as the dye in the bucket, and the more dye we put in the bucket, we turn.
The more red it will be.
Yes, the more red it will be, and so that's why I support those guys.
Let's turn to politics as we finish up. The next 90 days or so, we're going to have a flurry of activity.
Yeah.
You were uncontested in the primary, which is a great way to run.
Sure, best way.
What happens now? What do you see over the next few weeks? What's your plan? What's your strategy, just between us?
Oh yes, just between us. No, we're just going to continue to do the things that we've been doing, getting out and introducing introducing me to the voter, to those who don't know me, articulating our vision. We've already knocked on 30,000 doors. Despite being unopposed in the primary, we've been working and running as if we were 10 points behind. And I think you saw the result of that in the primary.
You got 81,000 votes or so.
81,000 votes. So very, very thank you to every person who pushed the button for me. I'm honored, humbled, and so.
You've got a Democratic opponent, Justin Canoe, who's a reality show star, a Hollywood liberal. You've never been in a reality show. So.
No,
you do have that.
When the bullets were flying up at me in Baghdad, they were real. It wasn't some Hollywood set, no.
Do you see that this is going to be a campaign where you focus on him, or a matter of just you tell your story, you win?
We're just telling my story. I mean, when you hire someone to represent you, you want to know that they can make good decisions. People make good decisions based on their intuition. Intuition comes from life experiences and values. My values are Tennessee values. I grew up on a small dirt road in a tiny town. I've worked hard all my life. I'm a Christian. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. My values are Tennessee values. Life experience, I've been a military officer, a combat veteran. I am a physician. I'm a patient, a cancer patient. I am a business entrepreneur. I started a company and grew it up to over 200 million in revenue and 1,000 employees. And I've been a legislator, an effective one, who's gotten stuff passed, even working with the Democrats. I've sponsored bills with the Democrats in the House and myself in the Senate, and we've gotten stuff done. So, my experience, my leadership, my values, that's what we're going to talk about.
Last question. You mentioned your Christian faith. One of the reasons that you did not become Secretary of the Army is because you were too Christian to get through Senate confirmation. There were Democrats, the same way that they're questioning people like Judge Amy Coney Barrett, that she's too Catholic, too Christian. Can a Christian actually make a difference in Washington when when it seems like all the odds are stacked against Christians in particular?
I think it's just a misunderstanding that people have. I am a Christian, and because I'm a Christian, I love and serve everyone, even people who don't believe the way I believe. My job is to love them, to serve them. When I went to combat, I was going to potentially give my life for every American. So absolutely, I think Christians can serve. And, you think of the set of morals and rules that we live by. Do not steal, do not lie, do not cheat, all of those things. That who do you want representing you? I think someone with those fixed morals, with a servant's heart, who loves everybody and who wants to serve everybody, that's the best person to serve. So, yeah.
Mark Green, candidate for Congress in the 7th District. What's the email address and website and all that stuff if folks want to get involved?
The easiest way to get involved is markgreenforcongress.com. There's a place to volunteer, and there's also a place to donate if you want to help out.
Mark Green, candidate for Congress. I'm Steve Gill. This is the Tennessee Star Gill Report, and we'll continue our political series in another week or so with another candidate.